Good afternoon to you if you live on the east coast of the United States or Canada. Good morning to you if you're living in Mexico. Welcome to another event from the absolutely incredibly fabulous Mexico Institute. I want to say a special thank you to its new director, Andrew Rudman, for letting me have this opportunity to speak with Roberto Velasco today. A little bit more about that in a second. Also want to congratulate Andrew obviously for his new position, but also for the incredible program that he's already put on in terms of the annual Security and Rule of Law Forum and other conversations that we've been having at the Mexico Institute. My name is Duncan Wood. I am the former director of the Mexico Institute, Vice President for Strategy and New Initiatives at the Wilson Center. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you today Roberto Velasco Álvarez, who is the Chargé d'Affaires of the Office of the Deputy Secretary for North America of Mexico's Secretariat of Foreign Affairs, SRE. He has experience in the Mexican public sector at the federal, state, and local level. After the July 2018 presidential election, Roberto was invited by Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard, to support the transition process as his press liaison. He served as Director General for Public Affairs and as the Director General for North America at SRE, where he is now the lead official for North American Affairs. Velasco holds a Master's of Public Policy degree from the University of Chicago, where he was the Chicago Policy Review's editor-in-chief, a Bachelor of Laws degree from the Iberoamericano University in Mexico City. He's an old friend of ours from his time in Washington when he was at the embassy here, and we had many, many interesting conversations. And I'm very, very much looking forward to our conversation with you today, Roberto. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Duncan, and I'm happy to be here with the Mexico Institute.
Great. Well, you and I are going to have a conversation, and then we're going to hopefully take some questions from the audience. If the audience, anybody in the audience has a question they'd like to ask, please send it either to an email address, which is mexico@wilsoncenter.org, or to our Twitter feed, which is at Mexico Institute. So please send your questions over because we'd love to have this as an interactive dialogue. But let me start out, Roberto, by asking you a general question. The bilateral relationship is always fascinating. It's always complex. But let me ask you your general thoughts about the relationship as it stands right now, but looking backwards, the challenges of, let's say, the past 4 years of dealing with the Trump administration, in particular, the past 2 years when you've been working with the López Obrador administration, and how you see the major opportunities, but also obstacles for the next 4 years now with the Biden administration.
Well, Duncan, firstly, let me thank the Mexico Institute for organizing this event and congratulating you for the series of papers that you've put together regarding the future of the US-Mexico relationship. I'm also very happy to see Andrew Rudman here, the new director of the Mexico Institute, with whom I'm sure we will have a very productive relationship as we had in this previous stage of the Mexico Institute. So let me start by sharing some general thoughts on the US-Mexico relationship, and then I'll address the question that you're posing. The US-Mexico relationship has always been extremely complex. These times have been no exception. The reasons for this complexity are extremely diverse. The mere fact that we share such an enormous border, which is similar to the distance, a little bit less than the distance between Madrid and Moscow. So the simple fact that we have to, share this territory and make joint decisions on common resources that we have at the border, such as water, makes it very, very difficult, and it makes it something that the two countries will always have to, accommodate and negotiate and make agreements in order to navigate this relationship. We also have a Mexican community in the United States, which is the biggest Mexican community that we have abroad. And obviously, we also have a very big community of US citizens here in Mexico, according to US State Department figures, we have around 2 million US citizens living in Mexico. So we have this other level of complexity that in our case also means that consular diplomacy takes a very big role in the relationship. So not only the usual formal channels of the diplomacy are important, but also these other layers of our diplomacy. Well, I'm just saying this to sort of frame that the history of the relationship will always present enormous challenges, and this should not make anyone nervous. They are the regular challenges that we face between two countries that are so big, that have such a deeply rooted culture, that have obviously different languages, their own cultural perspectives, and their own social ideas, and their own political cultures. Obviously, we had recently a phone call between President López Obrador and President Biden, followed by another set of conversations between Secretaries Ebrard and Blinken, which shows that we are all doing the work in order to have a relationship in these coming years that is in good terms. The communication between the governments is solid, as well as the knowledge of each other's countries and respective priorities. There are obviously new players on both sides, and we are aware of each other's needs. There are obviously areas of disagreement, but there are areas of agreement that are deep and relevant. On the short run, there are three areas particularly important for bilateral cooperation: migration, health, and the economy. Certainly, these three issues are connected by current COVID-19 context. Our views on migration are very similar. Both governments share a view of respecting asylum seekers and migrants' human rights, addressing the structural causes of migration in Mexico and Central America through international development, and enhance mechanisms to protect Mexican American and Mexican citizens in the United States, particularly through DACA and a promising immigration reform. From a position of respect to US domestic issues, Mexico certainly welcomes this decision to reinforce and expand DACA, to end the construction of the border wall, which became obviously an unfriendly symbol that has been building up over the past decades between our two countries. But we also welcome the immigration reform and a longer consular network and our embassy and our allied organizations. We are currently designing and analyzing what could be a strategy to support the efforts to get this reform that is important for our community done in the US. So with those general comments being said, let me talk about a little bit of the challenges and opportunities. During the past 4 years, we have, from my perspective, the most important challenge of finding what we call an architecture of coexistence between Mexico and the US. If you look at a Venn diagram, obviously you will have two spheres where you have a lot of issues where the two countries' views don't necessarily intersect. And our job was mainly to find the area of the Venn diagram where the interests of the two countries are actually aligned, where we have common ground, and where we have enough coincidences to move ahead. I think that allowed us to avoid what everyone thought was an inevitable confrontation between Presidents López Obrador and President Trump. We said at that point, well, that's wrong. We will find a way to navigate the different issues, and we did. And obviously, we had some major challenges along the way. Let me talk about a few of them. We had the USMCA renegotiation, which happened under a lot of stress for our economies, particularly for the Mexican economy and the Mexican currency, which created obviously political pressures and a tense environment for this negotiation, but we were able to build a new agreement between the three countries that managed to keep a lot of different elements that were positive from the first one. For example, I think this has not received enough attention, but we managed to keep the TN visas, the NAFTA visas, that are important for mobility of our high-skilled workers between the three countries. We were able to maintain cooperation on the environment, and we were also able to find opportunities on new areas where we could reach agreements. There's a new chapter of anti-corruption. I know there's a paper on this topic on this series that you just published. We also were able to include for the first time small and medium enterprises in the agreement. I saw on Chris Wilson's paper that he talks about the importance of including SMEs. We also finally included the digital economy. I also saw that in the same paper. We were able, for the first time, to include concepts that are new to this kind of agreements, like gender equality, which is included in the side agreement on environmental cooperation. Particularly, I would say that the sort of strategic view behind the USMCA from our perspective is that we are betting on a more integrated North America, and we are also not only betting to this more integrated North America, but we are trying to add more value to the products that we make together within this region, and that obviously is a bet vis-a-vis other economic blocks or other economic regions in the world. So these rules of origin and this idea for Mexico presented the opportunity of bringing bigger or greater parts of the supply chains to Mexican territory, and that way not only benefit from the tariff-free commerce, but also using this set of new rules to bring a larger part of the industries to our country. Also, another big challenge that was surprisingly difficult given the weather conditions of the past year was this agreement that we reached on the water sharing along the border on the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo, as we call it in Mexico. As you know, this is an old treaty. Actually, I'm bringing this up because today is the anniversary of the treaty. It was signed in a day like this in 1948, if I remember correctly. And it's an agreement that has been the framework for managing the water and the limits between the two countries for a very long period of time. And we had this really difficult situation where we had to reach an agreement on how to uphold Mexican commitments in the middle of a year that was very, very dry, which created complicated social situations. We also had a government in Mexico that was non-cooperative to reach this solution, a state government that you probably all know about. So I'm not gonna put any salt to all wounds, but you know what I'm talking about. And then this was for me an extremely complicated negotiation that I had to lead together with a wonderful team from the IBWC here in Mexico, our Consul General in Houston, and obviously all the team from Conagua. But it was particularly complex because in a big sense, it was a zero-sum negotiation. So most of the studies of negotiations that we do nowadays are, have this goal of having a win-win situation. But there are some aspects of a negotiation like this which are zero-sum. We were actually sharing water that had to be, we had to move water from one place to the other to uphold this commitment. So that was very difficult, and we were able to navigate that. Fortunately enough, we reached what I believe was a wonderful solution. And I can say, for example, one of the things that we included, that was a Mexican ask. I explained our counterparts in the DOS, the IBWC in Texas, that Mexico could not do any agreement that risked not having enough water for our populations in the north of the country for human consumption, particularly because that's a guaranteed constitutional right. So what we did was, okay, we'll use this Mexican water from international reservoirs, but we'll include this clause that says that if there's not enough rain in the next year and Mexico has less than 160 million cubic meters of water in the international reservoirs of Mexican property, the US will allow us to use water of US property for our populations in the north. And that way we'll guarantee this constitutional right, this basic human right of access to water of our northern populations. Fortunately enough, I can say that that clause is, I think, not needed anymore, because we have surpassed that 160 million cubic meter objective. So I think it was a good solution. So these are two examples, but we also had major challenges on the protection of our communities and a set of different things. But again, as in any challenging time, I mentioned the few, well, not the few, the many good things that the USMCA has now vis-a-vis the NAFTA. And I'm sure that this water negotiation, for example, left us also some very positive things and reflections on the Mexican side on how we can improve water management on the Mexican side. And also, I think on the community side, well, we've also done some great work and improved the way our consulates are working for the protection of our citizens. And we've created some very important bonds with local allies, which have been very helpful on this task. So I'm just gonna make a couple more comments on the challenges and opportunities under the Biden administration, Duncan, and then I'll get back to you for questions and having a conversation. So I think that, as I said before, we are on a good track with the Biden administration. There is a shared willingness to communicate at the highest levels from both governments, and also for our teams to swiftly work together. And very quickly, we find common ground to move ahead on cooperation for development and these new ideas on migration that we've been discussing in the past few weeks with the new Biden administration. As I said, there have been conversations between the president and the presidents, and between the secretaries, and also between the teams. I've been speaking a lot with Roberta Jacobson, and so I think there's a commitment from both ends on sustaining this level of communication and this very fluid and dynamic institutional exchange of ideas. And then the other thing that I would say, it's a very rare moment in time when the priorities of the two governments are so much aligned. The priorities of the two governments at this point are evidently the handling of the pandemic and vaccinating our populations. Secondly, the recovering of the economies of each country and obviously of the region. And then finally, I think, as I said at the beginning of this comment, the two presidents put a very great value on our cooperation for development on southern Mexico and the north of Central America, and some in this way attending the root causes of migration. So, you've been studying the US-Mexico relationship for a very long time, and I'm saying it's a rare moment in time because it's not only that the issues that the two governments think relating the US-Mexico or the bilateral relationship are aligned. That has happened many times, and we share views many times over time, and sometimes we do not, and that's when things get a little bit more tense. But at this point, the priorities of the governments, even at the national level, are aligned. So I think that's a great area of opportunity, and definitely we see with a lot of optimism and sympathy some of the decisions that President Biden is making. For example, rejoining the WHO, the World Health Organization, and finally joining COVAX, which is a mechanism where Mexico is a founding member, and that goes hand in hand with what we've been saying at the UN and in many different forums, and that is that we believe that vaccination should be universal, and that all countries should have access to vaccines. Not just the richer countries that have the laboratories at home, and that all the countries should contribute to the end of the pandemic globally by sharing these vaccines and by helping the countries that do not have access to these vaccines. So that is something that we view optimistically, and that is something where you will keep seeing a leadership of Mexico in terms of, giving a counter narrative and pushing against this idea of vaccine nationalism, which is something that we believe will only do harm to the planet as a whole, on the American continent, and to North America as a region. So that, as I said, is something that we view with a lot of optimism. Mexico, is in a process of reviewing past decisions and making new, decisions on some topics. And obviously, we want to find points of dialogue, but we want to have new rules of the game in some issues. That the Cienfuegos case was something that had a great impact in Mexico. But there was nevertheless a deeper, issue, which was that Mexico has had this participation of foreign agencies in our territory for quite a while now, and we needed to have clear rules in order to avoid, future instability and future conflicts in the bilateral relationship with the U.S. and with other countries, because it's not just directed to the U.S. So we had this reform to our national security law that is not designed to harm the agent's immunity or to disseminate confidential information, which was something that very wrongly some people claimed. I think that's not the case, and we've had a series of conversations that have allowed us to make that very clear to our U.S. counterparts. But we will have this new set of rules, and I think that there will be a lot of opportunities now with the Biden administration to also find new ways to cooperate on security, attending to what are the Mexican priorities, and obviously a change in strategy that allows us to be much more effective in the fight against organized crime. So, Duncan, I think I've touched on quite a few topics. Why don't I leave it there? And this way, we can have a longer conversation.
Thank you, Roberto. Excellent introduction to our conversation. For those of you who have joined late, we're talking with Roberto Velasco, who is the Chargé d'Affaires at the Secretariat of Foreign Affairs in Mexico for North America. Roberto, you touched on a number of issues there. I'm seeing that hands are going up in our audience. I'd ask the audience to send your questions, as I said earlier on, to Mexico at wilsoncenter.org, or to our Twitter feed, which is at Mexico Institute, and we'll be happy to include those in the conversation. What we have right now is I'd like to You've given I think, quite a balanced approach to the relationship here, Roberto. I'd like to push you a little bit on some of the more difficult questions that we have here, some of the issues. And I know that in many ways your job is defending things that are difficult to defend sometimes, but that's the job, right? And you and I have talked about this before. I'd like to begin with security because you kind of left off with that. And in particular, that point that you made about immunity for DEA agents. One of the criticisms of the new national security law is that it weakens the effectiveness of US agents operating in Mexico, largely because they don't feel that they can trust the Mexican government in general. Not saying that it's a particular branch of the Mexican government, but they have concerns, and these are concerns going back for many years about who am I actually talking to? How do I know that the information I pass over to the Mexican government isn't going to result in one of my colleagues being attacked or undermining the effectiveness of our joint operations? And I think this brings us to the most important issue in the security relationship, which is that after how many years of struggling together to counter organized crime, we still have a problem of underlying trust. This is not unique to the Lopez Obrador administration. This is something which has been going on for a long time. And I'll share with you, back in February of 2020, before the pandemic hit, we gathered together former Mexican ambassadors to the United States, former United States ambassadors to Mexico. And on the security cooperation, every one of them talked about that issue of trust. What would you put forward as ways in which we can overcome the misgivings that are on both sides of the border about cooperation in security, and particular, the handling of sensitive intelligence and information?
Well, firstly, something that is fundamental to say, Duncan, is that as in any relationship, particularly such a sensitive relationship as it is cooperation on security, the basis has to be mutual trust. If you have one partner which has this underlying problem of lack of trust to the other partner, well, that will definitely harm the cooperation. And I think we've done a lot of efforts to handle cooperation matters sensitively. I understand that there have been many problems over the year of situations where the Mexican authorities are corrupted, as it has happened also in cases in the US authorities. But I think that trust is a fundamental element, and it has to go both ways. Otherwise, cooperation will not work. It will not work because the basis for it are simply not, something where you can build upon. And that was, highlighted by the Cienfuegos case. I don't want to get too much into that, but if the basis is not mutual trust, then you really have a problem. Then, more particularly on the this reform and the future of cooperation. Well, regarding the immunity for DEA agents, this actually presents no change, and it's not just about the DEA, it's about every foreign agent as it is understood in the national security law, which are agents that are here under some cooperation security agreement, and that are doing law enforcement functions at their home and are in Mexico to share information with the Mexican authorities. So again, it's not particularly one agency, but in general, all the foreign agencies that fall under this category. There are two types of diplomatic immunity: the more broadly known diplomatic immunity, and then you have this consular immunity, which is functional and has another legal basis. One is based on the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and the other is based on the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. And in the case of these foreign agents, for a long time, they've been created in Mexico as consular agents. So they only have immunity regarding the activities that they do under the accreditation that they're under in our country. That was reflected on the 1992 rules that the Mexican government published regarding foreign agents. And basically the same wording is what now we have put in the law. It was an effort to codify the law, as we have a legal system that is based on codification of law, but it was not a substantial change from what we had before, and it's a change that is based upon the legal international framework that we have between the different countries. Then, as it comes to the ability to operate, well, in a sense, what we want to have is a clear idea of what some of these agents are doing in Mexican territory. And I think that any serious governments in the world will want the same, because this is our country, this is our territory, and we need to know what's going on and what they're doing. If that harms the ability of someone to operate, well, maybe the operations that they were doing were not, tip-top from the start. Because if you are operating correctly, there should not be a problem with transparency on those operations. But more broadly, to your final question, what's coming? I think, Mexico has been talking for a while about what are the priorities for us, and we haven't found some of the echo that we would have wanted. We've been talking about gun trafficking, which is a major problem in Mexico, mainly because of assaults and automatic weapons. And this is not an issue that will be solved only, by putting some operation in the border or having some extra layers of security in the border crossings. You actually need some changes in the regulation in the US that we understand that are extremely partisan and are very difficult to process, but they are important nonetheless, because the impact of these guns in Mexico is extremely gruesome. And I mean, I don't need to tell you about that, but they are really creating, wreaking havoc in our country in some cases. Then what we've also been saying is, we as a country need to figure out how to, detain the operations of these networks in our country. And we've been trying to do that for some time, and we're still trying to do that every day. And it's a very difficult task because it means, risks to the security of many people, and it means lost lives, and it means a lot of really, really hard work and a lot of difficult experiences for many people within our security forces and our law enforcement agencies, and obviously within our judicial authorities. But that's something that we need to figure out on our own, because that is what we need as a country in order to build up our capacities and actually have an actual law enforcement capacity and the conditions for having the life and the property of Mexicans be respected, and obviously respect to all of our laws. So being that said, what we've been asking to the US is, okay, we need to figure this out. And yet we still keep most of the time figuring out how, to avoid some things in getting into the US. And that's something that we do because this is a partnership and we're good neighbors, and we're convinced that it is important, especially with some substances that are extremely dangerous for human health, as is fentanyl. But what we also need the US to do is to figure out the networks and the capacities of these organizations in the US. Because from our perspective, evidently, there's another side of the equation where these organizations are distributing these drugs and these substances in the US. And naturally, a lot of those activities are the ones that provide these organizations with money that is the fuel behind their activities. So I think this is sort of the Mexican perspective, to actually attack the business model of organized crime between the two countries, and not just focus on particular strategies that we've seen fail in the past, as is the kingpin strategy, and many other things that we've seen that have not worked. The president has been clear that we don't want cooperation for military equipment. We don't want weapons. What we want is the help of the US in these issues. And there are also some other issues where at the local level, we're willing and we would like to have a US cooperation. Unfortunately enough, we've received some of that help, for example, in developing forensic capacities for identifying bodies, which is a terrible task that this government and the Mexican government in general has to face, and also in the fight against addictions. So I'm saying all of this to put out there some ideas of what we would like to see in terms of cooperation. And just one final remark, we saw this report from US Congress on Latin American security that was released a couple of months ago. Some of the things that it mentions are very interesting for us, reframing or remaking Merida initiative, which is something that we have many questions and thoughts about. Obviously, the fact that something that we like a lot is that it says that there should be a greater involvement of the State Department. I think that's important to have a greater coordination of the different agencies that are involved in this arena. So those are some ideas where we can build upon with this administration, and I'm sure we're gonna reach some good agreements.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Roberto. I'll be getting some other questions in on the issue of security while you were speaking. It's, I mean, some of them are very specific. Why did the Mexican government accuse the DEA of fabricating a case rather than having a weak case, for example, against Cienfuegos? Why did Mexico violate its mutual legal assistance treaty with the US by publicly releasing information shared on the Cienfuegos case? I mean, I'll let you choose if you want to answer those questions. But
I can answer the two of them.
Yeah. Just let me put forward one other thing, which is that in our latest paper on security cooperation between Mexico and the United States, written by Gemma Klopp Santa Maria, I mean, she makes a very nice point, which is that in rethinking the security relationship right now, we need to move away from a focus on all-out war against organized crime to a more strategic and sustainable deterrence. And I think that requires a rethinking of the institutional framework. So whether that's Merida 2.0 or 2.5 or whatever it is right now, or whether it's an entirely new institutional relationship between the United States and Mexico, I mean, that's certainly something that I think we need to focus on, because it's through that hopefully we can sort of rebuild trust and further deepen trust between the two sides. But let me give you those issues for response.
Okay, sure. So I'll try to answer the three questions. Firstly, regarding the DEA case, well, at this point, what the Mexican government decided to do, Duncan, was to put all the information out there and to let everyone to judge for themselves. I don't want to characterize more that information. Everyone can read it and make their own judgment on whether it was a solid case or it was not. It was not. Secondly, regarding the MLAT, from our perspective, we have not violated the terms of the MLAT. We consider that the information was shared outside the framework of the AMLAT, and that was the case because the Mexican coordinating authority was not involved in this first part of the process. And then lastly, on your broader question on being more strategic and creating new institutions, I think I like the idea of having new institutions more than Merida 2.0. To be very honest, that's a discussion that we need to have at the Mexican government level and then at the bilateral level, but we certainly would like to view some new elements there. But I think I've read this paper on security cooperation. There are many elements that I strongly agree with. And the first one is the being really clear that, well, the reality is that the strategy that we've had so far on cooperation has not given the results that anyone expected. So keeping this cooperation from a perspective could be completely futile, because if what we've been doing is not giving results, and why would we want to keep doing the same? We need to do some new things if we want to be successful. And definitely we need to have a more strategic approach. And we need to think about some of the key elements of organized crime, transnational organized crime, that are necessary, to attack. And from our perspective, I've mentioned a couple of them. One is this idea of the networks in the US that provide the organizations with money. And the other one is the gun trafficking.
Thank you, Roberto. I want to turn from a thorny issue to another thorny issue. A number of questions from the audience about energy. The first one comes from our Mexican co-chair of the Mexico Institute Board, Luis Tellez. He says, Roberto, thank you for your presentation. It's clear and direct. I'm worried about the changing energy environment, which goes against USMCA and the Mexican Constitution. It clearly has undermined the confidence of the investment community. Thank you for your answer. And I'm going to add on another question here that we also had. Why is the López Obrador government reversing energy reform and probably in violation of the recently implemented USMCA, when the likely outcomes will be a growing decline of confidence in Mexico's business climate, reductions in foreign direct investment in Mexico, and lower economic growth in the entire North American region? You and I have spoken about this before, and I think that these questions. Well, I know that the two people who have asked these questions, and myself, we care a great deal about Mexico. We want to see Mexico succeed, and what a lot of us feel is that these measures, in particular the new initiative on the electricity sector, are actually not going to help Mexico succeed. They're actually going to weaken confidence in the economy, drive up prices, and perhaps even more problematic in the long term is weaken Mexico's commitment to reducing emissions. And so I wonder if you could, and I know that you're not per se an energy expert, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and the challenges that we're going to face in the bilateral relationship over the energy sector.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. And first, you mentioned Luis Tellez, and who was the second person that asked the second question?
This is from Brian Butcher.
Okay, Luis and Brian, thank you very much, and happy to answer. So, well, firstly, thank you very much for the comments on the presentation. I understand that there's some level of concern regarding this initiative that was introduced yesterday on the electricity sector. I think, and we were talking about this before, Duncan, that this initiative is trying to address a real issue, which is that given the current sharp decrease on aggregate demand, the electric system must cope swiftly in order to guarantee energy supply. We have a reality, which is that in the past few months, we've seen sharp decreases on energy consumption. I understand that this is an initiative that has just been introduced. We will need to see the legislative process of the initiative. We also understand that there are commitments on the USMCA and that the companies that feel that there are grievances against them can use these channels, if these grievances should exist, to have an arbiter to resolve on the matters that they put forward. There are also legal mechanisms in place in Mexico. I would just say that we will follow up very closely this legislative process. But more broadly on the energy relationship with the US, I would say that this energy relationship goes deep and makes each nation stronger, definitely. We are committed, obviously, to our international climate obligations in the Paris Climate Agreement. We are very happy that the US decided to rejoin this agreement. And I was saying yesterday, and let me repeat that, in 2019, the US imported 30 billion of energy goods from Mexico and exported 34 billion. In every year since 2015, the value of US energy exports to Mexico has exceeded the value of energy imports from Mexico. And in 2019, the value of crude oil, petroleum products, and natural gas fell to 13 billion, and the value of energy export remained nearly equal to the 2018 value of 34 billion. So I'm saying all of this because the reality is that there's still big participation of private enterprises in the Mexican energy sector, in the US-Mexico energy relationship. And that is something that will obviously keep happening in the near future. There are some decisions that this government is making regarding the energy sector that I understand create concern from some investors and from some actors in the sector. But again, we have mechanisms in place. If we get to a point where they feel that there's a legal issue that has not been properly observed by the Mexican government, and in every case where we've got there, we've tried to have a friendly solution that is negotiated before getting to an actual, arbitration. So I hope it's a general answer, but I hope that gives a general idea of this issue.
Thank you, Roberto. I mean, just a very quick response from me. One is that I think that the concerns can be summed up in two ways. One is that the rules of the game seem to be changing, and that's not good. That's not what investors were promised, and that is a deterrent to investment. The other one is that, certainly with the electricity dispatch rules that are coming through in the new initiative, it's creating an uneven playing field. So to say that CFE energy will be dispatched first is really not providing a level playing field. If there was some other rule that was saying, well, we're going to take the cheapest electricity, or we're going to take the electricity which was greenest, and I know that hydroelectricity is part of that equation, then I think there would be a more higher level of understanding perhaps on this. And so, just saying that electricity demand has dropped, and so we're going to privilege CFE production over others, that's not going to cut it in terms of the conversation. So it really does have to be an approach which focuses on the level playing field, which is one of the great results of the 2013 energy reform, and to make sure that rules of the game are respected. If for nothing else, existing investors and the investors that are there invested in Mexico based upon certain rules. So let me turn to one other question or set of questions on the economy. And there are problems on sort of both sides of the border, I would say. Within Mexico, we have heard a number of deep concerns about a number of sectors. Investment in the pharmaceutical sector, investment in overall manufacturing. We had that very high profile case of a brewery being cancelled last year. That was a costly decision, I know. But there are rules of the investment game there. And lastly, I would say, you know, the digital economy. A lot of the newer companies in Mexico who are concerned about how there is going to be a harmonization of the rules for the digital economy, which is one of the things promised under USMCA. And so, you know, we're seeing problems emerge on an almost weekly basis in Mexico, and I'm hearing concerns from the private sector. On the other side of the border, of course, we've now got here in the United States a Biden administration, which is pushing the idea of Buy America and supply chain localization. So, you know, from that point of view, how do you think that fits in with the USMCA and with regional economic cooperation, integrated manufacturing platforms, etc.? Yeah, I'd love to hear your answer on that.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Well, firstly, on the harmonization of digital rules and other investment problems that you mentioned, well, on the USMCA implementation, the Secretary of the Economy has been doing a very serious and hard work for the past few months. We've encountered many issues along the way regarding patents, regarding, you mentioned also the digital laws and regulations in Mexico. We also had some issues regarding, tariffs and different taxing rules in Mexico, or tax fiscal laws. And we've been able to navigate most of those issues at the technical level with the Secretary of the Economy on the implementation of the USMCA. So I think on the remaining issues, I'm sure we'll be able to navigate that. There are still some very important aspects in the implementation of the USMCA that are pending. We're looking forward, for example, for having the first meeting and then, the work program for the competitiveness committee that is established on the USMCA Chapter 26. I think the Mexican side is ready. And I'm sure that the US side will be ready soon once the USTR authorities are confirmed by the US Congress. Definitely that's something that we're optimistic that will be a space where we can talk about some issues that impact the region as a whole, and some issues, for example, that I saw in Chris Wilson's paper, which is the supply chain management in such a difficult time, and the emergency supply chain management that has been very complicated for the three countries. We're in a better place now than where we were a year ago when this pandemic started, and when we started having this problem with the supply chains around April, May. But definitely we still need to figure out a better way to do that. And in terms of the digital area, I'm sure that together with the Secretary of the Economy, we'll find solutions that are agreeable for anyone, and that are in agreement with the USMCA. Then on the Buy America, well, obviously we think every country has a right to promote their market and to have an industrial policy. We evidently don't like when we are trying to integrate and implement the USMCA to have an approach that could harm this integration process, that could harm the different supply chains and different businesses that the three countries have together. I think we would prefer to see Buy North America than to Buy America, Duncan.
I would like to see that too, Roberto. So, I feel very strongly about this, having been something that I've worked on for many, many years. Now, we have only about 4 minutes left, and so I'd like to just get some quick responses from you if I can. One is about the possibilities for cooperation on public health, in particular on the pandemic, of course. We have We have another paper coming out in our series on the bilateral relationship that's been written by Andrew Rudman and Eduardo Gonzalez Pierre on the prospects for health cooperation under this administration. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on that, in particular on access to vaccines and the challenges that poses if Mexico falls behind in vaccinations vis-a-vis the United States. And the second question is actually on the environment. We have a question here from somebody at the IBWC. Do you see that priorities have changed in relation to the border environmental issues related to sewage and wastewater, and in regards to water deliveries on the Rio Grande?
Well, let me first refer to the water sanitation and infrastructure issue. I think that's a key element of the U.S.-Mexico relationship that I have been attending as a top priority of the SRE. We've done some great advances in Tijuana in the past 6 months. We did some public works on the pumping station of the Mexican side of the IBWC that allowed us to have, for the first time in years, zero, wastewater spillovers to the U.S. side for a few weeks or months during the past year. So that, when things start to work well, they don't necessarily get so much attention as when they don't work so well, but that was an achievement that sadly is not enough. We need a much greater investment to find solutions that are more durable, particularly in the months of the winter where we have these rains in the Baja California region that increase the flows and make it impossible for the IBWC pumping station to send the wastewater to the treatment plant. So we need, for example, to do some works on the state treatment plant and the state pumping station. And we need also to do some longer term work on sewage systems in Tijuana. We've been working very closely with the state of Baja California. We've been working very closely with the NatBank, with Conagua, with all the different actors that are involved, and we want to get to a new chapter with the EPA in terms of finding a solution. We know that there are resources in the USMCA for this, and Mexico is committed to having short, medium, and long-term plans and to execute them as we've been doing for the past year or so. So that just talking about Tijuana, which is a top priority, but in general, it's an issue that is going to start becoming bigger and bigger along the border, and we need to find solutions, not just in Tijuana, but in other parts of the border. And the Mexican section of the IBWC and the head of this commission, or the Mexican commissioner, Dr. Humberto Marengo, is working very hard with Conagua for putting together an investment plan for all the border in terms of water sanitation and water infrastructure. That obviously we will be discussing with the US IBWC and with the NatBank in the coming months and years. And then the other topic that you mentioned, I got carried away on the
cooperation
IBWC.
on public health and vaccination.
Public health, yeah.
Can there be more cooperation on this issue?
Well, on public health, I think there are many things we can do. Firstly, we have this joint US-Mexico Border Health Commission that has not been functioning as much as we would have wanted in the past few years. And we hope we can rethink this commission and strengthen it and see what else we can do. And it's the same for NAPAPI, which is this North American Pandemic and Influenza dialogue that we have. I think at the border level, we've been doing a lot of different efforts in terms, for example, for disincentivizing border crossings, and we've been successful on that. But we need to do more, and we need to find other ways to attend to these crises that go beyond travel restrictions, which at this point where we have such big levels of local transmission, the reality is that these policies, well, they are not as successful as anyone would want. The other side on vaccination, well, that's obviously the priority for this government. We've been doing some very great efforts for the past few months to get the vaccines on time. We are facing really complicated market conditions. For example, with Pfizer, you saw that we stopped receiving Pfizer vaccines for a period of time because they are doing these works on their plant in Belgium in order to increase the capacity of the plant and in that way to be able to give vaccines to COVAX that are important for all the low-income countries and the middle-income countries. So it's something that we support, but obviously has an impact in Mexico that we would like not to have, but it's impossible to avoid. And with the other vaccines, well, we've seen different problems. For example, with Moderna, we've been in talks with them for quite a while. We had a meeting today, but there are some challenges also in the production of Moderna in terms of when we can get it. And it's the same for the other many different vaccines that are out there. The market is complicated. There's great demand for the vaccines in all of the world. And even though we got very early on this market, well, there are conditions that will be unsurmountable, as are the production problems that I was mentioning. I think there's a lot that we can keep doing between Mexico and the US and between Canada as well. We've been having some great talks with Canada on this issue. We, for example, have been exploring together what we can do with some companies in order to bring parts of the supply chain or even the entire production to Canada and Mexico. We're very happy to see that Canada has reached an agreement with Novavax. We've been doing sort of trying to do the same as they're doing, and we have something similar with AstraZeneca. So that will be an area where we will keep working to have the technology transfer and the agreements, and to have this possibility of having the production of the vaccines at home, and also as we've been very insistent, well, we need to figure out how we share the vaccines worldwide. Every country wants to vaccinate their populations, but this is a global problem that requires global solutions. COVAX is one of them, but we need to think what else we can do. And it's important to vaccinate our own populations, but we need to think about the region, the continent, and the rest of the world as a whole.
Roberto, we're out of time, but I want to say three things. One, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. We've covered some very difficult issues. Number two, thank you for your openness. It's not that common these days, in particular, and it's greatly appreciated here in Washington that you are willing to engage in a public conversation about some quite tricky issues. Okay, and the third thing, and perhaps the most important, I'm looking forward to the day when we can be in the same place and we can share a tequila or a mezcal, and we can actually have a more human one-on-one interaction than we're having right now. Drinks are on me the next time. Thank you so much for giving your time to us today. I look forward to engaging with you again. And please always consider that the Wilson Center in general, the Mexico Institute in particular, is open for you. We'd love to help out in terms of holding dialogues on and off the record here in Washington, conversations about security, energy, migration, the economy, etc. Thank you so much for being with us, Roberto.
Thanks, Duncan. It was my pleasure, and I hope we can keep this conversation going. And I'll definitely make good on that offer for the drinks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.